All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to 1996 to discuss the murder of Elyse Pahler from Arroyo Grande, California. If you're one of the few dedicated listeners to this channel, first of all, thank you very much. You are awesome. But yes, we have covered this before, and maybe you would remember it. But the thing is, though, I was listening to something from Podcast One, and they had covered the case of Elyse Pahler, and they really talked about it a lot. And it's one of the few times that I actually had the opportunity to just listen to like a 1 hour discussion on the case of Elyse Pahler. And I really find that it's quite different when you're listening to something like the podcast format versus the traditional television expose, because it's often so much more about the ideas. Granted, though, of course, things like 48 hours and such can be uploaded in podcast form. I love that one, actually, but I mean, it was really just interesting to hear some perspectives on the case of Elyse Pahler, one that we have talked about previously, because there are even some points where I believe that the hosts kind of overlook some things. But yes, to give the most basic introduction, in case you haven't heard the previous segment, you probably have not, but the thing is, 15-year-old Elyse Pahler's body was discovered near her home at Arroyo Grande, California in March 1996. She had been raped and murdered there 8 months earlier by acquaintances Jacob Dilash, Joseph Fiorella, and Royce Casey. Now, these are three guys that went on to become famous for going on trial, citing the influence of the band Slayer as the reason why they committed this murder. This is probably the biggest thing that this case is known for. The murder of Elyse Pahler gets somewhat kind of synonymous with the girl who was murdered because of Slayer lyrics. And they not only they had the criminal trial and they were sentenced to 25 to life, all three of these boys, but they were also having a civil trial. The family of Elyse Pahler tried to sue the music business. They tried to sue the recording industry. And they went about this in a very interesting way that I just learned about last night. I mean, of course, they're going to try and sue the people because they allowed that they were selling a record that had this type of lyrics on it. But that wasn't exactly it. They decided that's a useless way to go about it. So what they did was they actually thought, let's sue the recording label for marketing this type of music to minors. And then it was like kind of just a different way to go about it. But of course, that wasn't very successful because, it's like this is just something that we've talked about on the channel quite frequently. And it was the case with the murder of Elyse Pahler that really kicked it off. And we brought in a few things from Killer Kids on Netflix, which covered this channel as well. It was just saying that if you listen to a song and they even talk about killing, even some of these things here, they say that stalk, rape, murder, torture, all of these things that are in the Slayer lyrics. Even if the song is telling you to do that, the general public has the expectation and the responsibility that they're not supposed to do it. And this is not only the law, this is also just basic human psychology. It's like a normally functioning person has the responsibility to have the sort of awareness that you shouldn't go out and rape and murder people because it's wrong, it's illegal, immoral, unethical, it's just completely heinous and disgusting. You're just supposed to have that sense of awareness, so it's very difficult to go after the music industry that way. But the thing is with this particular case, very gruesome and very sadistic. And it's like not only was she stabbed to death multiple times, there was actually a prior incident when the boys had kind of threatened her with a knife, and someone encouraged one of them to go for it, and Elyse Pahler just thought they were joking around or something, and they actually didn't commit the murder earlier on. But they even used the same knife from that previous incident to murder her later on in actually a grove of eucalyptus trees that was in Arroyo Grande, California. But I remembered something. There was always one sentence that stood out to me, and that was there are three boys involved, right? We gave their names. Jacob Delashment was one of them, and he gave an interview with the Washington Post, and he said that the music, referring to Slayer, is destructive. But that's not why Elise was murdered. She was murdered because Joe Fiorella, one of the other assailants, was obsessed with killing her. I mean, he just had this obsession with her, and that just led to kind of the developing the sort of plan to have her murdered. And they didn't bring this up in that last recording that I was listening to, and this isn't a direct response to them. It's like, it's just that that was something that was so greatly overlooked. The people I was listening to, they're talking about this and they're just saying, oh, isn't that a silly thing to do to kill her because of the Slayer lyrics? And I'm just like, now, wait a second. They stabbed her multiple times, and all three boys took part in raping her post-mortem. It's like, this was obviously a case of sexual domination. This isn't about anything to do with musical lyrics. But one of the things that has also been part of the conversation is that these boys formed a band called Hatred. And one of the reasons why they committed this murder, supposedly, was it wasn't only that they wanted to listen to Slayer and they're like, okay, well, I guess this is in the song, so we need to do it in real life. They thought that they could actually gain powers from Satan that would propel their band to stardom. And in the first recording I did on this, I mentioned that I heard on a talk show 20 years ago or something that the boys actually wanted to enter into hell. It wasn't just that they wanted a reward from the devil, and that they wanted to kind of become very good musicians, and they could become a death metal band or a thrash metal band or something. They could actually enter hell. And the father of Elyse Pahler, who appeared on that talk show, said very clearly that well, I mean, this is his comment, that the boys wanted to become the biggest band in hell, and there are a lot of variants of that. No one is very precise. There's some say that just they wanted to enter hell and gain abilities, and then they would come back to Earth and they would become a very big rock and metal band. Now, did the boys actually believe that? No, I don't believe so. At least not Joseph Fiorella, the guy that we just mentioned. Once again, this is sexual domination. And this is how people just want to run wild. And I was like, I'd always remember that line about the kind of explanation that had been put forward by Jacob Dilash. And I was like, where did I get that from? And I was like, oh, right, it's just right on the Wikipedia page. I'm listening to this hour-long podcast and they're talking all about Elyse Pahler, and they left out some of the most basic information. They didn't mention once that this is a case of somebody who had this type of unhealthy sexual obsession with Elyse Pahler. That's Joe Fiorella. And that it led to destruction. And one of the things, though, that we have to be aware of is that things like music and movies and video games and TV, they can be an influence. Oh, they can be an influence. They could be affecting someone's pre-existing mental condition, but they might tell people the how, but they won't tell people the why. They might give people sort of an idea about how they will commit the murder, but that's not why they committed the murder. Maybe the choice of weapon or the type of method that they used to go about it, but that's not why they committed the murder. In this case, it's just lust, greed, selfishness, and also you sort of see that when you have any sort of group like this, when you have three people that are committing this type of teenage murder, it's almost always that there's one who's kind of like the ringleader, the bad seed, the influencer, who's kind of contaminated the other two people. That's just a dynamic that we have going on with these types of cases. With this exact one, I mean, we have to really say, though, that it's a horrible tragedy. But the thing is, though, all of the types of kind of sensationalism around this blew out of control, and it really shifted away from thinking about Elyse Pahler as a person to just kind of questioning, like, is music this destructive? I mean, I would say no. And once again, I mentioned before, I'm not a big fan of Slayer. I mean, I just didn't really have too much interaction with them, during my junior high school, college years. I just, not even really sure too much why. It's not just like I'm a diehard Slayer fan and I'm sticking up for my favorite band. It's quite to the contrary. I'm just not very familiar with their music. But at the same time, creative and free expression laws should be for anyone who is, well, following the laws. And it really appears in this case that the band didn't do anything illegal, so they shouldn't really be facing consequences. Furthermore, once again, we mentioned the kind of mental awareness things that we need to have in society and responsibility placed on the individual. That way you can't go after the record label. But one of the things is, people just want to talk so much about that. That's one thing. And the second thing is, oh, there are these crazy boys in California who believed that they could go into hell and get powers from Satan. I mean, that's kind of become the focus of this stuff. I mean, that they were just kind of duped into all of this, and that some of that is like just going to be like wildfire for the media. But in reality, there is no wild story here. There's a disgusting story, but not a wild one. The story here is just that sexuality. One of them couldn't control his sexual impulses and his prone tendency to murder, and that's what happened. And he contaminated two other people and pulled them into the murder. And no, I don't believe that they're any less guilty. I mean, when you're having sex with a corpse post-mortem, you lose all sort of innocence. You lose all forms of innocence. You lose any iota of innocence that you would have if you are defiling somebody's corpse. So those guys we shouldn't really be sympathetic to them in any way. It just sort of means like one person was kind of the bad seed that had the type of lustful feelings. But what happened was the other two should have said no, or they should have talked him out of it, or they should have recognized, go to your, I don't know, who, guidance counselor, assistant principal, even somebody be like, hey, this guy Joe, he's got problems. Is that really going to happen in any realistic scenario? No, it wouldn't, because people don't really like to rat somebody out. I mean, it has happened. I do know someone personally who had a similar incident like that happen to them, but it's not very productive. The whole point is you got to kind of just do anything other than murder somebody and have sex with the corpse. That's your answer. That's how you kind of deal with something like that. But the reason why Jacob Dilash came forward was he had kind of converted, and he had just decided that he wanted to come clean. Just the overwhelming feelings of guilt and all of those things like had just been too much of kind of a weight that would bear down on them. But some things that I have learned recently about this case is that the guys involved with this were not only kind of just going after Elyse Pahler on the fly. It's just they had actually done other satanic rituals. They had done something like they kept a toad in a box and then they crucified it. It's apparently something from Aleister Crowley. That might be some stuff that we can cover on the channel in the future, just some of the things about Aleister Crowley. I don't know if you guys ever shopped at Hot Topic or something, but I went to a Hot Topic store once, and I swear that they had only one book in the entire store. This is maybe 12, 13, maybe actually probably 16 years old now, because I guess I'm getting old as fuck and I can't count the years. And they had only one book in the store, and it was about Aleister Crowley and just like Satanism, but it was also how it could have kind of been an influence on the music industry. And I was like, wow, I really should buy that, but I don't really want to spend like the $24.99 or whatever it was, because like that's an expensive book. That could be some stuff that we could really talk about, though, just Aleister Crowley and Satanism in general. Not like we're going to evangelize it or anything, but what's really going on and what are people all about. Because sometimes in these far off corners of YouTube, like where you are right now, we can actually ask the challenging questions, and we can also kind of cut out all of the fluff, and we can just get down to the heart of the issue. It's like sometimes people are going to ignore the basic facts, and they're just going to take a sort of money, sex, power story and blow it out of proportion. And in this case, it's power, power, and power. I mean, you got guys who are just like trying to sexually dominate a girl, 3 of them, and then they're definitely going to be using this as some sort of perhaps motivation for their band to kind of create some sort of image. I mean, are they actually going to enter into hell and get powers from the devil? Did they even believe that that would happen? Perhaps not. I mean, but... And it's also, was the music really to blame? No, but this is just a case of power, power, and power, and definitely sexuality. But as we've mentioned in a few cases recently on the channel, There's that saying though that rape is not about sex; it's about power. And like there was one of the people who was kind of making some accusations during the Me Too movement. Even said that she didn't want to say that she was raped. She said it happened, but she's like, if you say rape, that makes it sound like it's about sex, and it's not about sex. It's about power, and that's really what you see about the murder of Elyse Pahler. It really seems like the guys were targeting, or particularly Joe Fiorella, was targeting Elyse Pahler because he wanted her, he couldn't have her, and he couldn't accept that. Talk about pre existing mental conditions. You don't get what you want, so you just turn to murder. I mean, there's definitely something going on psychologically there. And the other guys who were just pulled into it should have known better as well. So that's kind of where they are. But I actually think I just misquoted one thing. I believe it wasn't Jacob Delashment that came forward and talked about how he had that conversion to Christianity. I believe that was the third boy, Royce Casey, who came forward to that, just to kind of give a sort of a clarification on that. It was the third one, Royce Casey, who was kind of overwhelmed with the guilt and such. But I mean, that's kind of like a trivial detail at this point, just trying to get as close as we can to the record. It's like, what are we really going to do in life? Are we just going to have to look at kind of the world and be like, there is just a significant portion of the population that has murdering tendencies and murderous impulses, and they could be, the person who's just going to like snap at any time? Is that how we're going to have to go through life? What I can definitely say is we can't blame it on video games, music, movies, media, death metal, thrash metal, whatever you'd like to say. You can't blame it on stuff like that because it's always going to be something else. It's like, and I mean, what did people do prior to the media? It's like, I mean, there were definitely crimes that were committed before the invention of video